Thank you. It's a great honor to be asked to deliver this lecture. And today is a celebration. It's a celebration of this great university. It's a celebration of this great city. I'm proud to have been born here, and I'm proud to have come back here. For me, it's a rather marvelous and unexpected return. So thank you to everybody who made that possible. I thought we might go on a little bit of time travel around Manchester to see where we were. Think about where we are, and then imagine where we might be. You know the story. Do you know the story? 1824, the Bridgewater Arms and a group of Manchester businessmen agree to fund a mechanics institute where working men can learn the basics of science and technology. And the institute is a great success. And by 1840, it has over 1,000 subscribers and a 5,000 volume library. And then, in 1846, the wealthy cotton merchant, John Owens, left 100 grand or so to set up a college free of religious affiliation and, as he put it, to admit students without respect to place of birth and without distinction of rank or condition in society. And that's the Manchester egalitarian spirit at work. 300 years earlier, didn't Hugh Oldham give money to found Manchester Grammar School, the nation's first free school for any boy, regardless of rank, depending only on ability? Women, of course, didn't fare so well. But women could attend their own classes at the Mechanics Institute, but this had a lot to do with waxing flowers. And that might be why the first female professor appointed there in 1921, by then it was a technical college, she lectured in botany. But Owens College did start admitting women in 1883, and that's pretty good going, because if you think about it, Cambridge was founded in 1209, and Oxford was founded in 1326. So it took those venerable institutions 7 centuries to arrive at the startling concept of higher education for women. Manchester worked it out in 30 years. Christabel Pankhurst took a law degree here. Indeed, as you saw, when she was arrested for heckling Lord Grey and Winston Churchill at the Free Trade Hall in 1905 over votes for women, she entered Strangeways to serve her sentence wearing her university gown. What a woman. What a Manchester. Now, Owens College soon outgrew their first modest house in Quay Street, and Alfred Waterhouse was appointed architect to design those impressive buildings on Oxford Road that began opening in the 1870s. And at about the same time, the college sought university status and the right to confer degrees. Manchester was accused of having provincial ambition. The Member of Parliament for the University of London, Robert Lowe, because you could have a Member of Parliament in those days if you're a university, he opposed the move on grounds of scholarship. What were they going to teach in Manchester? Calico printing. The Times newspaper was against and joined with the Saturday Review in concluding, and I quote, that anyone educated in Manchester would certainly be dull and probably vicious. This view of Manchester fitted the picture of Coketown described by Charles Dickens in his novel Hard Times, 1854. Gradgrind, the schoolmaster, a man of realities, a man of fact and calculation. Facts are what I want, he declares. And do you remember that well-known scene where he challenges one of his unfortunate pupils, Sissy, a poor girl from a circus, to describe a horse, because she likes horses. Sadly, Sissy has no horse facts at her fingertips, so another pupil, Bitzer, steps in. Quadruped, sir, graminivorous, 40 teeth, namely 24 grinders, 4 eye teeth and 12 incisive, sheds coat in the spring. In marshy countries, sheds hooves too. Hooves hard, but requiring to be shod with iron, age known by marks in mouth. "Now, girl number 22, said Mr. Gradgrind, "you know what an horse is." Gradgrind and his mill-owning friend Bounderby. In Dickens, you can tell everything by the names. Hate imagination. They are interested in product. People are product, whose only function is to produce product. Gradgrind is a reverse Rumpelstiltskin, spinning the reckless and unknown golden possibilities of his pupils into the same old useful straw. Rather like Margaret Thatcher, who was the wrong kind of chemist, the Gradgrind view of life has no room for play, which, as everybody knows, is how every child starts in life and how every good idea is born. I love it that Manchester's latest Nobel Prize winners here, Kostya Novoshelov and Andrei Guillaume, given the prize in 2010 for working out how to extract graphene from graphite, mark their award as proof that you can still win a Nobel Prize mucking around in a lab. Mucking around in a lab, mucking around with paint, mucking around in a band, mucking around writing a book, a poem, just mucking around. Play has a number of octaves, but it is the serious, consuming, concentrated, life-delighting, for its own sake capacity that we're born with. If you can't play, you can't imagine. And if you can't imagine, you can't create. Creativity in different doses and dilutions belongs to us all. It's the human condition. You don't have to write a book or win a Nobel Prize. Creativity is wider than creating a thing, a something, more than having a good idea that makes a difference. Creativity is a way of life, or it should be, or it could be. The food on the table, the way you dress, the swing you build for your kids, the garden you make, the conversation that changed the way you think about something, what you suddenly understood when you read a book, and how that had an active effect on your mind. None of this is GDP. None of this is good old straw. It's the intangible, valuable, human chance at life. Life that is so short, and for many, perhaps for most, so disappointing, so unhappy. Can that be right? The Industrial Revolution here transformed the world. It also made humans miserable in an entirely new way by taking away their humanity. Not people, hands to mind the machine. Dickens had a love-hate relationship with Manchester. That's normal. He was appalled and impressed by the ceaseless satanic mills, their mephitic vapours visible as the train stopped at Stockport, a damp, sullen, sooty scum over everything. Imagine it. By the 1850s, there were 108 mills in Manchester, vast, steam-powered, coal-fired, gas-lit factories, subtropical temperatures inside, the air heavy with cotton fibre and sweat. "I have seen hell," said Mrs. Gaskell, "and it is white." The working day was 12 to 14 hours, 6 days a week. Bring your own food, mainly potatoes turned in lard, and piss in a bucket passed round every 4 hours. Clustered round the factories were the back-to-back tenements, the dismal, slumped courtyards, the cellar dwellings. By the mid-century, about 15,000 Manchester workers were living in dirt floor cellars without windows or ventilation. Life expectancy was 51. And the Temperance Society, God bless them, earnestly wondered why the working classes turned to drink. It used to be said that the fastest way out of Manchester was a pint of gin. But cotton then was worth £25 million a year to the British economy. Manchester was known as the Golden Sewer. Dickens, who was made of energy, as ceaseless and restless as any mill machine, was mesmerised by unstoppable Manchester. But he had done factory work himself, the miserable, hateful years in the blacking factory in London. And he believed in the soul of the working man and woman, the imagination of the working man and woman. He came here by train when Manchester opened its first public lending library in 1854. The Libraries Act, 1850, passed by the Liberals, allowed local authorities to raise a rate to build libraries. The Tories opposed the act, worrying that libraries would become sites of social agitation. The reason you can't talk in libraries is so that you can't socially agitate. It's true. 22,000 working men and women in Manchester raised £800 to buy books. Those men and women wanted knowledge of all kinds, more than printing calico. The Manchester Lending Library was one of the first in Britain. Manchester's always been a place where things happen first. The first canal. We know all about the other Bridgewater and his canal, cut to fetch coal from the mines into the town. His engineer, Joseph Brindley, self-taught in the way that is so often the Manchester way. He was illiterate, and he didn't work from technical drawings. When asked to explain the Barton Aqueduct to a parliamentary committee, he arrived with a model that he had made himself, out of cheese. The world's first passenger terminal, its terminus on what is now the site of the Manchester Museum of Science and Industry. And reading about this line from Manchester to Liverpool, I found that train travel back then was spookily like train travel now. You had to fill in a form for travel at least 24 hours in advance. We couldn't just get on the train. Start times were advertised, but arrival times could not be guaranteed. Smoking was banned too, but only in first class. And then I discovered that the rest of the carriages had no roof. It was Stephenson's rocket, of course, that pulled the first train along the line. The engine looked like a coal stove on wheels, which it was. But it roared up to 35 miles an hour, providing you could shovel fast enough. And the Duke of Wellington, Britain's Prime Minister, was on that first train in 1830. He was not an enthusiast. He said, "Trains will encourage the masses to travel about." And he was right. In Wakes Week, 1845, 150,000 Manchester workers took train excursions. Blackpool was getting 10,000 visitors every warm weekend. Well, Manchester has always known how to party. The first canal, the first railway, the first steam-powered mill, the first free school, the world's first public library for scholars, Chetham's, where Marx and Engels worked together on either side of the same wooden desk that still sits there in the alcove. The Midland Hotel, where Rolls met Royce, and a legend was born. Cheetham Hill, where the Englishman Tom Spencer, looking for a bit of schmutter, met the Jew Michael Marx. And the sign over their first clothing warehouse, "Don't ask the price, it's a penny." Here in the university, as we saw, Rutherford won the 1908 prize for chemistry, became the first person to split the atom with its far-reaching and unforeseen consequences. And his team included Hans Geiger and Niels Bohr, who went on to work with Einstein. The world's first programmable computer, Baby, was built here in 1949. And when IBM's first business computer came on the market in 1953, it used the technology pioneered at this university. And here's Alan Turing, fresh from code breaking at Bletchley Park, dreaming about artificial intelligence. Turing should have got the Nobel Prize. Instead, he got arrested, chemically castrated, and hounded to suicide because he was gay. That cyanide-laced apple is a fairy tale gone wrong. Snow White, Eve and the serpent, the price of knowledge that must include self-knowledge. Who am I? What am I? Questions not answerable by discoverable facts. The Apple logo, the apple with the bite out of it, part Eve, part Alan. Microsoft, Google, Facebook, Twitter, the digital platforms that have changed our world. But we're still carbon-based humans in a silicon world. And soon, a graphene world. Graphene, the world's first two-dimensional material, not counting Nigel Farage. And they did it with sellotape. The Graphene Institute in Manchester, not in Cambridge. So 2 fingers at AstraZeneca for being daft enough to relocate to Cambridge just before Manchester's next big wave. The French don't get it, do they? Graphene will alter the fortunes of this restless, changing city once again. Manchester is on the cusp of a new identity. Innovations here, the money's pouring in, 60 million for graphene, and the university has just this week been given 15 million from the generous Alliance family for the business school. So what could this mean for Manchester 200 years after its first industrial revolution, 100 years after King Cotton started to decline, 70 years after the war and some of the disasters of the post-war rebuild, 25 years after Cool Britannia, waterside living, footballers' wives and bling. To think about that future, we need to dive back even more into Manchester's past, Manchester's radical past. Manchester is bolshy, Manchester's noisy, opinionated, tough, no respecter of persons, unless those persons are worthy of respect. The second Lord of the Manor in Manchester, Robert de Grelly, was one of those fiery barons who forced King John to sign Magna Carta in 1215. And next year, our newly refurbished Whitworth Gallery opens with an exhibition by Cornelia Parker, the artist chosen by the British Museum to represent Magna Carta for the 700th anniversary of that momentous event. And 100 years after Magna Carta, another Greeley, Thomas, granted the town of Manchester its first charter. And this set the price of beer, the weight of loaves, and had important things to say about anyone who could do business in Manchester, because the answer was anyone. Now that was radical, because most medieval towns had strict controls on upstart entrepreneurs. If you didn't belong, you could just go home. An early version of UKIP. Manchester took the opposite view. Come and make money, set up shop, no monopolies, no medieval mafia extorting setup costs. And this social and psychological flexibility, small island, big town, proved crucial to Manchester's astonishing growth and growing power, even before the Industrial Revolution made it Britain's preeminent town and then city. Manchester's first charter was good news for women too. Single women could trade, run businesses, and be members of their guild. They could represent their husbands in court, and they had the right to take part in the governing of the town. And this is the 1300s. It would take 600 years more before women anywhere in Britain achieved anything better. And where did the force behind the movement happen? Here. The Pankhursts, Manchester, reclaiming history and making history, all at the same time. And I'm thinking about the Chartists, patiently, angrily, forcing parliamentary reform. The 1832 Reform Act wasn't wonderful, but it did give Manchester an MP. And I'm thinking about Peterloo in 1816, named because it was a year after Waterloo. And that massacre in St. Peter's Fields of men, women and children peacefully gathered to urge reform, brutally broken up by the Tory militia. And I'm thinking about the Anti-Corn Law League that started in a pub in Manchester. God help us if we lose our pubs. The league that became a national movement and successfully smashed the landowning cartels who are artificially keeping high the price of corn. The repeal of the Corn Laws brought down the Tory government, and split the party, so that a rump of modernising Tories, there are some, the Whigs and a few radicals formed a new party, the Liberal Party, and a new government. And the Liberals were the factory reformers, the education reformers, the champions of free trade, which meant something rather different than it does today. But we'll come to that. It was Richard Cobden, in whose old home on Quay Street, Owens College was first set up, who gave land to Manchester to build the Free Trade Hall, the only building in England to be named after a principal. It's a Radisson Hotel now. Make of that what you will. The Manchester Guardian began here, in a small way in 1821, in response to the fallout from Peterloo. Guardian founder John Taylor got the idea for the paper on the way back from the Lancaster Assizes, where some Tory had sued him for libel, i.e. telling the truth about Peterloo. And the Guardian that won the Pulitzer Prize for its work with Snowden goes on representing the values that were born in Manchester. It was only 2 years ago that the present Tory government threatened the Guardian with closure if it did not smash up its computers containing the Snowden files. You do wonder whether the Secret Service should come to Manchester for some basic lessons in what a computer is. But the Guardian has always been a campaigning newspaper, and it became great under the editorship of C.P. Scott, eventually its owner, and also a Liberal MP for half of his 50-year editorship. Whatever your politics, you should be proud that Manchester, and only Manchester, has produced a world-class news media that has never been bought out or bought off. Manchester, the first unionised labour organised by the Lancashire Spinners and Weavers. Manchester, Engels lived here, working in his father's textile factory, Engels and Ermine, visited by his friend Karl Marx. Is it any surprise that Marx looked at Manchester and became convinced that the workers must control the means of production? So much wealth, so great poverty, the engine of England, and 50% of the children of Manchester dead before their 16th birthday. Yet in spite of their own hardships, the people of Manchester were not divided against the hardships of others. During the American Civil War, the unionist anti-slavery blockade of the southern states meant that Manchester's raw material, cotton, could not be shipped. Manchester workers came out against slavery, even though their own living and working conditions were not much better and often worse than those endured by plantation slaves. And Karl Marx wrote in the New York Daily Tribune in 1861, as long as English cotton manufacturers depend on slave-grown cotton, it could truthfully be asserted that they rest on a twofold slavery, the indirect slavery of the white man in England and the direct slavery of the black man on the other side of the Atlantic. But while many mill owners didn't care how they got their cotton or their profits, their workers showed more conscience. On New Year's Eve, 1862, workers staged a huge anti-slavery demonstration at the Free Trade Hall. And that statue of Abraham Lincoln in what is now Lincoln Square is engraved with part of the letter that Lincoln wrote to the working people of Manchester, thanking them for their great sacrifices. So much for Hobbes, so much for Darwin. Life was certainly nasty, brutish, and short, as the well-fed philosopher Hobbes put it. But the shorthand Darwinism of the survival of the fittest meant nothing to workers who couldn't afford to feed and clothe their children after an 80-hour week. Surviving in Manchester was nothing to do with hard work or aptitude. It was the luck of the draw. And yet, those workers who supported Lincoln and the anti-slavery movement, those Chartists who were thrown out of their jobs and beaten by Tory thugs, The men and women who saved out of no savings to buy books for that first library. The union organisers who risked permanent blacklisting. The women who went in and out of prison enduring force feeding, who chained themselves to railings. All the bravery, all the causes, won or lost. Those people believed that they could change things. And they did change things. History was optimistic. Progress, yes, everywhere. Even after, even because of 2 world wars. Even the Cold War had its benefits. Bernard Lovell got the money to finish his telescope to spy on Sputnik, and Britain got Jodrell Bank. What happened in Britain after the Second World War was important for the possibility of human progress, for our self-belief, for the chance at something like the greatest good for the greatest number. A noble aim. The welfare state, the National Health Service, good wages for working people, the Equal Pay Act, affordable housing, social housing, the BBC, the National Theatre, the Arts Council, education, for everybody, regardless of rank or social distinction. Education has been such a part of Manchester's radicalism. I don't know how you ended up here tonight, but I ended up here tonight because I had free education. After the war, there was going to be a future for everyone, wasn't there? Not just the rich, not just the fortunate in life. Those 30 years after the war, when, like it or not, the ideas of the left were in the ascendancy, and when the percentage of wealth owned by the 1% had shrunk, those years were a time of optimism and hope. It's true, by the late 70s, union battles and world financial problems took us to a place very like where we are now, where we suddenly trusted the right to get it right. In Britain, Margaret Thatcher came to power in 1979, determined to shrink the state, break the unions, free the markets, cut taxes for the rich, and reverse as much of the post-war nationalisation as she could. And she succeeded. 30 years later, we hit the biggest global crash in history. But strangely, the facts, those Gradgrind facts, have done nothing to dent the fantasy. Remember what Einstein said, that doing the same thing and expecting different results is the definition of insanity? Welcome to the free market. The free market, like some unrepentant God after a fit of violence, will fix it in the long run. Unfortunately, as Keynes remarked, in the long run, we are all dead. So here's the neoliberal fantasy. The less the state regulates and taxes us, the better off we will be. Public services must be privatised, public spending must be cut, and business should be freed from social control. It's all about merit. Competition rewards hard work and talent. Success or failure is a lifestyle choice. Those who are doing well are fed the message that they need not worry about those who just can't climb the ladder fast enough, if at all. There's no need to pay a living wage because the benefits system will subsidise those employers who prefer to pay their shareholders rather than their workers, like Domino's Pizza or Amazon. We are seeing an unprecedented rise in mental health problems, depression, self-harm, anxiety, eating disorders, alcoholism. No doubt Big Pharma will come up with pills for everything, or so we're told, just as we're told that science will save the planet before it's too late. But demonstrations in London last weekend suggest that we're coming closer to serious social unrest. Noam Chomsky said there's an experiment going on right now to see how much of the people and how much of the planet you can destabilize without it descending into total war. At the same time, UKIP has its first MP, and it very nearly took Middleton and Hayward from Labour here in Manchester. This is a time, if ever there was a time, to be political. We can't give up on politics, especially not here in Manchester, with our history. Manchester is a fighting town. Manchester is a wealth-creating town. But the Industrial Revolution didn't make life better for the masses. It took politics to do that, politics based around social justice. Graphene is going to make a lot of money for the British economy. But where is that money going to go? And who will it benefit? And how much will it benefit the north of England, pulling wealth away from the south, away from the city-state that is London? Geographical inequalities are doing as much damage to the social fabric of Britain as economic inequalities. Even if you move south for the work, few can afford to live there with space or comfort. Manchester is affordable. If the jobs come here, if the opportunities return, Manchester can be the new solution for Britain. And that's exciting. And it's exciting for young people who above all need hope. You know, Manchester students don't do as they're told. Their recent challenge to the orthodox teaching of our economics department was welcome and timely. But students are nervous too. They leave with large debts in a shrinking labour market and less chance of owning their own home than the generation before them. Education, we're told, must fit the marketplace. Now, a grad grind education is not only what is being offered on many courses up and down Britain, but it's a lot of what students want, a qualification as cheaply as possible, in as short a time as possible, and you can't blame them. But what right has the free market to turn human beings into servants of itself? Are human beings for the economy, or is the economy for human beings? It's not unreasonable to want your town or your city to be a pleasant, safe place to live, with parks, a library, a thriving arts and music scene, a leisure centre, somewhere for the kids to play, somewhere for young people to go, a pub, somewhere to meet your friends, all the things being slashed to bits by the cuts. It's not unreasonable to want decent schools and housing, a job, some employment prospects. Neoliberalism won't deliver any of this. It hasn't delivered, and we have to ask for better. Universities are places of inquiry. Universities do much more than supply the labour market with graduates. Universities even do more than win Nobel Prizes. Universities are in the business of creating futures, all kinds of possible futures, through innovation and human capital. Universities need to be vocal in this debate for Britain, the kind of Britain that we want to live in, that we want our children to inherit, the kind of Britain we want to be proud of. Politics is too important to be left to politicians. Rather than an increasingly apathetic Britain, where we feel that nothing can change, it's a lottery. I think there's a chance at an active Britain, where everything could change. I wanted to talk today of this extraordinary city that is Manchester, this extraordinary university that is this university, because there is a new future here, and one that could invigorate the whole nation. But don't let it just be about money. Let it be about values. Manchester's always been about values, about vision, because Manchester's always been about vision, about more than GDP and growth, about quality of life and social justice. Alan Turing said, "We cannot see very far ahead, but what we can see shows us that there is plenty to do." Thank you. Thank you.